Welcome, Wargamers, to the honored halls of the mortal realms, because today we are talking all about the Tempest Lords, as requested by a few folks, and we're going to be going through the who, the why, the what, all about them. If you're not familiar, these are basically one of the major storm hosts of the Stormcast Eternal, so if the name didn't ring a bell, that's why. They have a distinction of being one of the earliest storm hosts that we meet within the Age of Sigmar, and also a distinction of being one of the least described or ill-informed storm hosts, the ones that we know very little about. And so we're going to chat about them today, but right before I do that, I just want to give a shout out to Not Just Gaming, an awesome store here in the US, and they have big sales on all of their GW products. And using the link down below goes a long way to supporting me as a content creator, my wife, our cats, the channel, all of it. It's life-changing stuff. Thank you to everyone who has so far. One other small bit of news, I've actually joined the Goonhammer media team, and so if you want to learn any more about AOS, tactics, strategies, or anything like that, head over to Goonhammer down below. Now, for those of you who are new to Age of Sigmar or the faction as a whole, as I said before, the Tempest Lords are a particular storm host or sub-faction of the Stormcast Eternals. These are the Sigmar lightning-forged demigods sent out to combat the forces of chaos and really whatever else comes up. And to be honest, there's been a whole lot of whatever else comes up lately, meaning first there was chaos, of course, but then it go to Nagash did the big death spell, there's undead everywhere, now there's orcs and stuff like that. Now, as for the Stormcast in general, they are generally mortals who Sigmar plucked up in their final hour, typically fighting against the forces of chaos. They are then reforged, the pure magics of Azir grafted to their souls, and they are trained, equipped, and armed to become immortal warriors of the God King. Now, we've talked about Stormcast Eternals immensely before. I will leave a link to their dedicated playlist down below, but I wanted to hit on a few things that are very important and relevant to our discussion here. For starters, storm hosts are formed from like-minded warriors, or that share a common trait of some kind, meaning where they're from or their history, that kind of thing. So, for example, the Hallowed Knights, one of the more popular storm hosts out there, they're all united by faith. Faith is the theme, permeating every single one of them. They might have all had different names for Sigmar back in their original mortal lives, spanning centuries or whatever, but collectively, here now, they're all brought together because they are the most zealous and devout, and religious, I should say, of all of Sigmar's champions. Conversely, the anvils of the Heldenhammer are very diverse in their outlooks and how they revere things, but what unifies them is that they all generally come from Shyish. Of course, there will be exceptions. These are not hard rules. You can do whatever you want, but these are the general vibes that we're getting from the different storm hosts. And I wanted to point that out, that this is how warriors are bundled into storm hosts. It's not about necessarily particular regions or particular acts of strength or something like that. It's just kind of what makes you special. And that makes it a great place to start, right? What makes the Tempest Lords special, and what was the reason that this storm host was founded? So our story begins back in the Age of Myth, specifically in Hysh, and this is as chaos is kind of entering everywhere, right? It's all kind of falling apart. So here's my abbreviated synopsis of some of them. There existed an hourglass-shaped desert, and the city that controlled the desert was right in the center of the hourglass. So right as things get tight, that's where this kingdom was located. It was known as the Kroken Dynasty, and their homeland was the Hyshian Sun Wastes. Well, at some point, a Khorne army wanted to cross the desert, which means they would have to come into the direct contact of this kingdom. Now, what we end up with here is sort of like a situation from the movie 300, right? The Spartan history, the Hot Gates, where you have a massive army, meaning the Khorne, but they all have to be funneled down into a relatively small area to pass through, meaning the Hot Gates in history, the Hyshian Sun Wastes in this story. Now, the leaders of this city, the Kroken Dynasty is all it's called, but the leaders here are looking around and they're realizing the numerical disadvantage is so immense that if they wanted to stop this Khorne army here, then it was going to require total war. And now, when I say total war, limited warfare is you're smashing up armies and you take territories and you kind of let people go. here and there. Total War is like every man, woman, and child. We're going to strap like a gun to everything that has room for a gun. We're going to make everything dangerous. We're going to salt the earth so that they can't enjoy it even if they take it. Like, they went for like a full extinction level grand fight, which is pretty awesome. Because at this point, they were like, well, the Age of Chaos is in full swing. Things are falling apart. There's nowhere to run to. So if we're going to make a stand, like, let's make a good one. And it's important to know that as this is going on all over the realms, there's two very important traits that these fighters are demonstrating that Sigmar is looking for. The first one is the conviction of these leaders. Every person in charge of this dynasty worked to help and save everyone, no exceptions. Okay, like, everyone was given the best care they could, set up with the most training they could to defend whatever they could. Like, it was just all the leaders being awesome. They demonstrated things like charity, pity, empathy, and zeal. And I just feel like the idea is if anyone was going to stop the Khorne army, it was going to be these guys, right? The ones who really understand it's all or nothing. We're working together, every man as part of the team. So that's the conviction of their leaders. But also, the second thing that Sigmar was looking for was their strategic genius, because they were ultimately able to hold up an army several times their size for quite a long time. We're not really given like details about the battle. I really want this to be like a campaign book at some point. Maybe if they ever do like a Histories of War series or something, that could be really cool. But realistically, we don't know a lot about the actual numerical size of the forces, but we do get the idea that like the Kroken dynasty really bled this Khorne army like in a big way, that there was something so notable about the difference in size of the forces, but also that the weaker force was able to put such a black eye on the Khorne army. So they have strategic military genius. It's not just rallying people, although they do that, they just are really good at warfare. And those two traits, right? Convicted leaders who are all about serving the people that they have put them in power, and military masterminds. Those are things that Sigmar wants. Now, fast forwarding through that story, all those people get slaughtered, okay? Like, just straight up. I mean, it's not enough. It's like a blip in the radar to a Khorne army of that size and magnitude. But Sigmar scoops up a whole bunch of these souls, in particular, that leadership, that aristocracy, the nobility. And these are the origins of one chamber of the Tempest Lords, the Royal Victrians. It's not indicative, as I'm not saying that every single Tempest Lord came from this one battle, but this one battle did bring forth a lot of Stormcasts in the form of Royal Victrians, and is a really good kind of exemplary battle for what the Tempest Lords are culturally. He's looking for people who show mercy and pity and care and empathy, but also have this strategic genius behind them and the ability to rally troops to them. We actually met the Royal Victrians. They were a division of the Tempest Lords that we met actually back in the Realmgate Wars, the opening campaign of the setting. And that's really the only time they popped up to my knowledge. Let me know if you can think of any other times. But they kind of work a lot as like an ancillary force in the Realmgate Wars without having a whole lot of section to themselves. And while they don't have like a common location to their backstory, they do share the same story as the one we mentioned before, right? The moral of the story was not how great the aristocracy was, but it's the values and characteristics of these people who at that moment had power and chose to use it to serve as many and show as much grace and mercy and empathy and stoicism as possible. And those values, well, they're all over the place, right? They're not bound to a particular geographical location. There's heroes among us everywhere. All over the realms, remember we're still in the Age of Chaos with their particular story, empires are burning, continents are getting overrun, demons are flying around freely. So for so many kingdoms, there's just nowhere to go. And in that desperation is the opportunity for heroism, inspiration, zeal, and so on. And so Sigmar is picking up the people in their worst moments that, when everything is darkest, that is their moment to shine. And so the story of the Tempest Lords generally boils down to leaders or people in some form of authority taken up and reforged into weapons, and then going back specifically to keep doing more of what they were doing for people. It's like I don't know. They're all awesome. Now, I've kind of combined why they work and why is this cool into like one mega section here in my notes, so let's go through this. And really is, to be honest, after reading a bit more about these dudes, I feel like they should be the poster boys of Age of Sigmar, not the Hammers of Sigmar. Okay, and what I mean is like the Tempest Lords have this like dark blue armor. I think that should absolutely be them. I understand why not because of Ultramarines, but in terms of like their temperament and what they represent, I feel like the Tempest Lords are the best of the Stormcast. They come into a situation, they form command structures, they support all elements from commoners to lords, and when I say defend them, I mean they go out and march in huge numbers, extreme force. But then when the battle's over, they build the people up. They have this knowledge of like government and statesmanship to be able to facilitate growth of culture. They build defenses alongside people and give civic lessons and provide all kinds of security. To me, they almost, if you're very familiar, we've been going through the Horus Heresy lore for 40k, or 30k rather, on another show that I do, and I would say they're more like Ultramarines than Hammers of Sigmar in that Ultramarines really emphasize tactical genius and flexibility with the order of command. That's really what we're seeing here. If you drop a small squad of Tempest Lords into a colossal Cities of Sigmar army within the lore, they'll whip that army into shape. They will become the greatest fighting force ever. That's the idea, is like they're a force multiplier for the other things of order that exist. Now that being said, they are still like full Stormcast. They have all the chambers available to them, they have all the warriors they need, but that they also have this like civic element to them that makes them great to be had in some of those pioneer areas where establishing yourself is very important. It is the highest priority. Which ultimately I think is what the Stormcast are supposed to be. Like, when they're described in the lore as being, they're everywhere in terms of they can be everywhere, but realistically they're out fighting front lines, and there's only one or two Stormcasts that are back for like civic things or civic protection or defense. I just think these guys make so much more sense. And kind of like I said, blurring into why is this cool, they really do remind me of an idea that was brought up, I believe it was Phil Kelly in like an interview video from forever ago. But I really like this idea of that the idea is the hammer that they all use. The hammer is the big symbol of all the order stuff, of all Stormcast things, certainly. It's iconography is just about everywhere you can find with space to put a hammer. But the hammer is a tool of both creation and destruction. And this is a idea that I think is exemplified in the Tempest Lords. Yes, they are a weapon. They are made to be a weapon against chaos specifically, and then whatever else comes up. But they are also meant to be builders, and I don't see that nearly as much in other storm hosts. Like, for example, Knights Excelsior, the ones who are in all white, they get more and more zealous and like uncompromising as things go on. They lose the ability over time, in my opinion, to act as the creation side of the hammer because they can't work with others. Whereas I look at the Tempest Lords, and it's like, yeah, there's fighting that needs to be done, but someday, in theory, that fighting will end, right? Like, it's the same kind of thing as the Space Marines, like going up to the Horus Heresy. Everyone's kind of asking, well, what happens to us when the universe is conquered? And these guys are like, well, we still have plenty of work to do. We have to build up society. It's not enough to own the land. You have to like build good places for people to thrive and prosper. And I just don't feel like other Stormcast have that same view, or at least the same fixation on that kind of success. And while I'm generally dubious of like, this is a faction that's made of all the rich people in charge, like that sounds pretty rough. The fact that the riches are only noticeable because they were all given up to save the lives of anyone that they rule, it makes them okay. I think they're pretty cool. Hey, let me ask you this. If you are a Tempest Lords player, I would love to know what kind of army you have and how you bring their little bits of lore that we have from the Realmgate Wars mostly into the game of Age of Sigmar. I always pin the most helpful comments down below, so I would love to hear your thoughts. Thank you all so much for hanging out with me, and I'll catch you next time. Happy wargaming.